Commission. And Giulio and myself, we have been working for years on the topic of social impact investments and social outcomes contracting, which is one of the tools in the space and the official policy term we use in the Commission policy for outcomes-based support tools. And we are very, very happy to begin this conversation with you today. It is a new conversation looking through a new lens of how we can orchestrate social change together and reach inclusive and fair outcomes in society using the new tools and approaches, such as social outcomes contracting. We have an excellent lineup of speakers coming from various fields. You have seen the agenda. We will have a set of high-level opening remarks right after, followed by an energizing keynote on how to achieve social change. And then we'll have two panels, a policy panel unpicking some of the ideas that are presented, and a showcasing and demonstration panel for innovative initiative and emerging partnerships in the space. It is very interesting, so please stay with us to the end. The session is being recorded. And without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Ms. Elena Flores, who is the Deputy Director General at the Commission's Director General for Economic and Financial Affairs, DG ECFIN, who will do us the honor to open the session for us officially. Over to you, Elena, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Georgia. Thank you, colleagues that are on the call with us today. As Georgia said, I'm Deputy Director General in ECFIN, in charge of International and Invest EU. And I have to say that the Invest EU part, which is the one that covers our discussion today, is pretty new to me. So I'm really happy to have this talk today as almost one of my first external activities in my new responsibility, and I'm really happy because I think it is an area which is particularly relevant and particularly important. It has always been, but now in kind of thinking about how to get out of this crisis, I think it takes a new role or an even more important role. And I would like to say that this discussion about the social economy, I see that completely as part of the EU recovery strategy and completely as part of our priorities in terms of investment. So I don't see like, a separate work strand or something that it is really specific and so on its own, but I think it's really at the core of our priorities. And it's clearly part of the approach we have taken in the new big investment package, recovery package, which is labeled Next Generation EU, in the context of the new financial framework that we hope all that will be working on the ground very soon, once all the sort of political ratifications, etc., will be completed, which should be soon, very soon. And the core of this new approach to investment, I would say, is really to make sure that growth is inclusive and that growth takes a clear priority in terms of social justice. And if you look across the various instruments, you will find that coming through a bit everywhere. And what is also important is that the approach that you have been pursuing for a long time, which is let's do things that are result-oriented. Let's use the financial capacities we have to really obtain results. I think this is an approach that we have now very clearly at the core of the Recovery and Resilience Facility and at the core of the InvestEU program. And clearly the way we design the instruments is that money will flow based on results. And that provides a big incentive to all the actors involved to really get it done in the way that it has been agreed. So I think it's this combination of both the impact of the financial intervention and the definition, the joint definition of the actions and the results that we want to obtain, which I understand is also one of the key features of the approach in the social economy field. So one of the elements that I think are very important and the instruments that we are using in this field is the social outcomes contracting, which in my words, I would say this is really a way of jointly defining the objective and jointly defining the instrument and how we will go about it. And I think that this way of jointly defining is very important, and also jointly defining what we want to obtain. Because I think that applies really in many policy areas, but I think that agreeing on the expectations, as I call it, and we can say agreeing on the results we want to obtain, which more or less is the same thing, it's very important that we have a clear agreement from the start of where do we want to go, because then we can really, that facilitates, it seems to me, to agree on how best to use the instruments we have at our disposal in terms of being effective, because we know about how do we measure the effectiveness. We measure this effectiveness in the view of what the results are that we want to obtain. And so, in other words, clearly that's about impact. So we want to make a change. That's clearly what I understand with all these innovative approaches. We really want to make a change, and we want to mobilize both public and private capacities. And I say capacities because it's not only money, it's about the capacity to define the projects and to develop them, to implement and bring them to the end in the most efficient possible way. And we want that those capacities, both financial and technical capacities and knowledge capacities, are as effective as possible to make a change. So I clearly understand that this is, let's say, not brand new, but you have already some experience, and I think it's very important to learn from experience. I understand that there are a number of pilot projects that are underway in different corners in Europe. And I think that you will have during the day the possibility to go into depth into some of these projects to learn what really works better and how we can use that for developing the activities here. The same, I would say, looking at what are the EU supporting tools. Well, we have a policy in particular on this social outcomes contracting approach that started in 2015. So we have some experience, but today this approach includes a complementary dedicated investment facility and an advisory platform. So the investment facility was launched in 2016, as you know, and as part of the European Fund for Strategic Investments. And there we have a number of flagship transactions that have taken place in a number of countries on topics such as better life chances for migrants, supporting labor market integration, preventing youth homelessness. So all this remains clearly a priority, and I think that those experiences will tell us a lot about how to improve them and how to be more impactful with the instruments we have. Under the advisory label, a new SOC platform was launched last year, and this is a collaboration between the European Commission and the EIB. I think that's really a good help for public promoters to develop these SOC projects in order to manage broader strategic change. And we hope that this rather new approach is going to really be used extensively, because I see that as a service that we really want to offer for all the actors in the field to make good use of it. Now, looking ahead, just let me say a couple of things. As you may remember, or maybe not, when this new commission started, one of the key priorities is to have an economy that works for people, which I think that tells a lot. But what do we put behind that? Well, I think that the social, the SOC approach is clearly something that for sure delivers an economy that works for people. And I think it's really worth to put a lot of effort into that. An illustration of this is the new EU Hero pilot, which focused on housing and empowerment for Roma. there again, there is another interesting project to look at and see how it works and what should be improved in order to take it to a kind of higher level in terms of impact and delivery. We are very much in favor of experimenting. I think this is the social economy areas is a place where we need to experiment and we need to learn from experiments, and that means that also sometimes we need to take risks that maybe are higher than in other experiments. But I think it's very important to really from experiments then develop to a broader scale what we consider that can work. And I mean, if I may, I have to say that in my kind of private life, I have some experience with working on NGOs on the ground, and I see this experimentation and then being able to move it to a larger scale is something that it is very, very important, because clearly the public policy at large, it doesn't come to some solutions immediately. So it's very important that we have these on-the-ground projects that then can be scaled up, and that those that have the experience can also develop the way in which this project can be scaled up, and then transform it into a more large policy approach in the country. So I think that link between experimentation and broad policy proposals and decisions is very important, and the social economy, I think it's a key player for that. So I think that's what I would like to tell you as a sort of starting the day. I'm sure that you will have very intensive discussions. I will try to stay with you a little bit. I don't think I will have much time, unfortunately, but I'm interested to hear some of your thoughts, and then obviously I will follow up with the team, not only today, but in the days and weeks and months to come. So with that, I would really like to close this opening intervention, telling you that expectations are high with all these projects in the social economy field, that we are trying to put in place as much as we can the support both in finance and in let's say knowledge and platforms to exchange and to really help each other. And that this is clearly a dynamic field. We know that some things will work and some will not, but this is, I think, it's part of the experimentation, and we look forward really to be successful in this new age or new step of the social economy. Thank you very much.
Okay, it seems that Georgia, Georgia Saudi is basically off, so we need to see how to get her back among us. This is I'm turning on your audio, Georgia, but it looks it doesn't work. So let me try again. But no. Okay, let's see if moving her from one stage to another helps. No. Okay. So in these cases, what we need to do is to improvise. But since we have a very clear way ahead of us, I will give the floor to Dragos Pislaru, member of the European Parliament, who accepted this invitation, and we are very happy to have you here with us. Hoping your audio will work.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's working, and thank you so much. Good morning, Giulio. I mean, one of the key lessons that was not in my speech was that you need flexibility when it's about social impact investment. So we adapt, and we import things from the business model, like being agile and trying to respond in a very organized way to the social realm. And this is actually the best of two worlds, to try to bring the knowledge of the business to do actually good and have impact. Now, thank you so much for inviting. I was really glad to hear Elena Flores, Deputy Director. And again, Elena, if I may, you said that this is one of the few events or the first event on this particular topic. This is actually great that you've started with that. So, I mean, if you from the beginning we have you on board, that would be great. DG Actin is actually doing wonders in terms of integrating different things that are happening in the Commission. And if we want indeed to have this economy that works for people, your work will be critical. So I salute you, and I will thank you very much for your nice words, and wish you a lot of luck. You have a lot of allies around you. Now, just to look back in the past a little bit, for me, yesterday was a particularly important day. We celebrated 2 years from the European elections, and I think that I need to confess that the title of this debate, achieving better outcomes for social inclusion in Europe, was actually part of my plea in those elections, and I think that a lot of other colleagues in the European Parliament are sharing this particular view. And indeed, I'm a hybrid. I've been an academic, an entrepreneur, being a Minister of Labour at a particular point, and working a little bit in the corporate sector. And right now, as a politician, I'm trying actually to use that all together and to try to create bridges. And I will start with quite a let's say an ambitious plea, and it might be controversial as well. So my first statement for this intro speech is that social policies are not left or right. And that's actually very important. Today, social policy is not doctrinally charged. Social policy has actually been associated in the past with a particular, left-wing perspective, with aids, with benefits, with the national member states' responsibility to intervene, to provide safety nets, to redistribution. And somehow this led to create a rift a little bit in between, the way in which the political spectrum is looking at social policies. And I think that this has also brought to a lot of inconsistencies regarding, the measures taken by one government and then obviated by its successor. I remember then when I was a minister, we had the package for fighting against poverty in Romania. And then just after we went out of the government, then the next government completely wiped it out. So I would say right now that regardless one's political affiliation, the social agenda must represent the priority. And indeed, this is something that it's not controversially, put there. Vulnerable people have not, they must not be left in fear or deprivation, or otherwise their insecurity and uncertain future would be exploited actually by politicians who threaten our democratic values, by populists with harmful messages from extreme left to extreme right. So that's actually very, very important. That's the reality that we are having today. Citizens are actually the essence of the union, and if we need actually to listen to them, to address their needs, be that short-term benefits to help them overcome a difficult situation, for instance, in the pandemics right now, or what we are talking more today, long-term investments for correcting the situation structurally and provide opportunity for the better. So I really believe that what we are talking here is actually crucial for what is coming. The social issues are actually rooted at individual, community, and local level, but solutions are at, and funds are provided at regional, national, and certainly at European level. And somewhere in the middle, and there are things that are not, going well today. There is miscommunication, lack of cooperation between the authorities, lack of vision, or simply preference to reactive short-term measures, which indeed are leading to gaps between expectation and reality. So here we are. We are here at a situation in which we have a clear message that we are not going to leave people behind. We are with a clear message that we should have an economy that works for the people. We have a clear message that, especially after the pandemics, and especially given the fact that this crisis was not a financial one, but more or less coming from the health/social world. We need actually to change the way we've done things in the past. And the second lesson, or the second point that I wanted to outline, is that we really need to break the silo policy approach. And I'm so glad that this is happening right now in the Commission, and I'm really wishing to see that going on and spreading across the governments, local, national, and in EU level. So the idea is that the border between the economic perspective, the financial perspective, where we are talking about financial returns and about taking care about those things that economists are actually talking more, and the social realm, which was initially associated with more sociologists' work, anthropologists, and so on and so forth. These boundaries are right now blurred, and I think that more and more, if you look at Nobel Prize winners and so on, and behavioral economics, I mean, the trend is actually clear that we need to merge the two realms and have indeed investments and have indeed the approaches from the business sector and from the financial world applied with the societal impact in mind. And indeed, I mean, if we look at the synergies that can be created, when we talk about measures in terms of health, employment, education, social assistance, and coupling them with the business sector and economic development, all of them are actually linked, and they cannot be seen as separate policies anymore. And I was working a lot with grassroots organization and looking at solutions that they are putting forward, and they've always been integrated. I actually applauded the mayor of Madrid when he announced at the debate last year his intention to create the city's first social impact bond. This project receiving now a feasibility study from the European Investment Advisory Hub funded by the Commission and the EIB. I listened to the mayor of Rotterdam talking about the social impact fund Rotterdam set up and vision. I mean, these are only two examples of leaders that from a local perspective understood that there is no such thing as, the financial and economic department, and the social and, assistance and benefits department. And the approach should be actually an integrated approach. And the pandemic, I think that it clearly illustrated that silo policies will never bring social cohesion. The model that we are currently used to support vulnerable people and to park issues with a particular DG or a particular minister, this is actually something that it's not working, and the shock of the pandemic has actually shown that. Uncorrelated intervention made us miss opportunities. So what we need the solid coordination structure, and the solid coordination structure can actually be stemmed from the European Pillar of Social Rights Action Plan that we have right now. But I think obviously it's about the use of innovative and dynamic use of EU funds. And right now this leads me to the third point I want to make, and the final one. And this is the plea that I'm making for what we are having right now in debate, the social impact investment. And I would say that the lessons that we've seen are actually clearly suggesting that social policies require large-scale projects that require long-term financial support. And that means consistency in terms of funding. And, this is the only way to have effective results, addressing structural change. And we need actually a longer period of time, so not reactive, but proactive. And the complexity of social policies are actually, determining some member states and some governments to prefer sometimes short-term measures. And again, reactive spending, it's not the way forward. You cannot just have remedial measures, just keeping citizens afloat and alimenting actually their dependency to benefits and social support. We have a lot of citizens that are in some sort of a Stockholm syndrome dependency on authorities and social policy, and this is not the social policy that we want. We would like to empower people, to empower citizens for a decent living, to give them access and opportunity to actually progress in their lives. And this cannot be done if we are not passing from from reactive spending to prevention investment. That's actually the term that I'm using, prevention investment. And when investing, too often a government, a company, or a person thinks only about financial return. But right now we have a plethora of evidence suggesting that social return, societal return is more and more becoming more relevant in today's economy. And in the aftermath of the pandemic, one important step for our recovery is to revisit our old conception of investment and spending. What the society needs right now are market solutions to people needs. And this kind of thing that I call prevention investment is actually, critical to foster, clearly real convergence, but also nominal convergence. because this is actually creating, you know, a virtuous circle in the economy that actually bringing people in, creating participation rate, you know, improving their job, their wages and the jobs, and that leads to more money for taxes and then more money for investment in return. And I think that the investments in skilling, upskilling, reskilling, in education, in health, you know, related to the labor market on one hand, to skills on the other hand, to the general capacity and productivity of people. These are things that have directly, related returns. And one thing it's important, if we agree that we are talking about investment, that means, and this leads me immediately to that social policy should not be just the field of, you know, public governments, because if it's about investment, then the private sector should be in. If there is a return, the private sector should actually be there to tap on those returns as well. And again, we need to give room for more private investment, in particular social impact investment. And this is happening. But right now, you know, because actually more from a public sector, there was the wrong conception about them, or limited actually understanding, this is the right time to move it forward. And again, just, you know, a few words to conclude. At the beginning of my mandate, I was working on the InvestEU file. And I remember listening to the Commission representatives highlighting the potential of social outcome contracts and social impact bonds. This was 2 years ago. It may seem like in another life, but I went to the EIB headquarters in Luxembourg and had one-day session with them. Frankly, here was actually present there, and indeed he is an authority in the matter. I knew even beforehand that, and we will be exploring these ways to how to promote, you know, social impact investment. And I had those elements in mind during the negotiation recovery and resilience facility as a co-rapporteur for the European Parliament. I wanted to make sure that the RRF is the start of this new model. We are talking there about 672.5 billions. And we actually asked specifically with that in mind, coherence in policies, to have a balanced reform and investment view in 6 European priorities, and then complementarity among EU funds. And this is why the European Parliament and myself have insisted on the ability to transfer RRF funds towards InvestEU, so that InvestEU can complement the public investment with innovative private investment. So we have money, we have now a vision. We need to push it further, to transform it into a mainstream thing, not just, you know, some, you know, pilot projects. And indeed, we need to add to the financial return the social and societal return. We have ESF Plus, Child Guarantee, Youth Employment Initiative. All of them, they will remain scattered if we will not get to channel them toward innovative solutions for social investment with the private sector more. Social impact bonds, social outcome contracts have already been used by several member states. But right now, what we need is to be creative and show that we can innovate, innovate actually at a larger scale. And indeed, a proper recovery and consolidated resilience can be obtained only in an inclusive union, but not in theory, not conceptually, in practice. An inclusive society is the one which we manage to deliver at community level, in which integrated community services are understood as the key solution for social and territorial cohesion. This is actually what the next generation truly needs and expects. And I'm really looking forward to listening to your proposal and association to bring them with me in the European Parliament, in the RRF working group and the EMPL committee. Thank you so much, and I wish you, to be able together to make a stronger Europe through this kind of social impact investment. Thank you.
I hope you can hear me now. I want to give warm thanks to both Dragos and Elena for these passionate remarks. After this, I think that the policy direction for social impact investments is quite clear. It is the new direction of public policy. Dragos, I was going to introduce you as the voice of social impact investment in the European Parliament, I think after hearing you, rightly so. And Elena, thank you very much. And just to the audience, the European Social Outcomes Contracting Advisory Platform and the HERO pilot that were mentioned in her speech will feature in both our subsequent panels. But before we go there, next up, we go up a notch, and we will have a special keynote delivered by Julie Battilana, who is a professor of social innovation at the Harvard Kennedy School. The keynote she prepared especially for us is called Transforming Our Economic System, on the need to agitate, innovate, and orchestrate. And it was especially recorded for this session. We'll be able to air the recording here, hopefully. This is due to the time difference between Boston and Mannheim, since we're digitally gathered at Mannheim. I would now attempt to perform a very brave thing in light of what happened, to share my screen in order to play the keynote. Is it working? Can you see my screen? Yes, great. And then hopefully you can see and yeah, Julie. Okay, so can you see my... Julie tells me it's not working.
No, it's not working. What we can do is I try to share my screen, and as I have the video saved.
Okay.
Okay, so I will. Okay, I'm now here with another device, and I'm trying to share the screen.
Great. We don't have audio.
Of the multidimensional crisis that we continue to experience, the role of the social... Ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to be joining you for this session of the European Social Economy Summit. Today, in the face of the multidimensional crisis that we continue to experience, the role of the social economy is critical to imagine and implement an alternative vision of our economic system and society more broadly. As we all know, we're not only facing a health crisis related to the pandemic, but an economic and social crisis too, characterized by rising inequalities on top of an environmental crisis. A common root of this multiple crisis can be traced to neoliberalism, a doctrine that has championed government's deregulation of markets and the exclusive focus of business on profit maximization. It is now well documented in research in economics and in sociology that neoliberalism has led to environmental destruction and the concentration of wealth and power in the hands of a small group of individuals and corporations. The consequences of this power concentration are many. Among others, this situation has endangered democracy by giving enormous influence over political decisions to the wealthy, who concentrate power in their own hands. This situation has also fomented resentment among the many towards a system that is rigged against them. Staying the course is not an option. To restore the conditions of a strong democracy and build a society that is greener, fairer, and more equitable, we must dare to rethink and change our economic and social systems, which is precisely what so many of you participating in this summit are working on. Experience and research, including my own, have shown that this kind of change is hard. I call it divergent change, as it requires challenging and transforming our dominant norms and power hierarchies in society. This is why bringing this kind of change about cannot be an individual endeavor. It requires the collaboration and concerted action of multiple actors across the private, public, and non-profit sectors. More specifically, in my research, I have identified 3 roles necessary for the success of such collective efforts for change in organizations and in society. The roles of agitators, innovators, and orchestrators. Agitators are the ones who speak out against the status quo and raise public awareness of the problems. Today's young climate activists who demand that we take urgently needed action to tackle the climate crisis are a good example of agitators. Innovators are the ones who propose alternatives to the status quo. they develop concrete avenues for change in the form of new ways of organizing, such as, for example, the ones developed by social entrepreneurs over the past decades. And finally, orchestrators are the ones who help implement these new solutions at scale and ensure their adoption. They can be representatives of public authorities, members of civil society, as well as business and social sector representatives. Orchestrators work as a collective to enable the coordination and collaboration of all the parties involved, binding these parties together in support of the change they are pursuing. Agitators may well be the most visible of these groups, and they certainly play a critical role to help put issues on the public agenda. But agitation alone is not sufficient to bring about change. Innovation and orchestration are critical too. In fact, agitating without innovating offers no path forward, while innovating without orchestrating prevents ideas from having impact. In the face of the multidimensional crisis that we are facing, the good news is that innovations that aim to reimagine our economic model for shared prosperity and environmental sustainability already exist. This is where the past decades of learning and experimenting in the social economy have played a critical role. From the world of social businesses to social entrepreneurs, impact investors, cooperatives, and innovations emerging from not-for-profits and public organizations, the work of so many of you in attendance today has demonstrated that we can build an alternative economic model that provides economic opportunities and freedoms while paving the way for shared prosperity. But to move beyond the stage of isolated innovations in the social economy toward transforming the whole economic system, we must now orchestrate the reform of capitalism. That is, we must change the norms and the laws, the mindsets and the institutional context under which people, organizations, and companies operate. This inevitably entails engaging actors across sectors, including governments, businesses, civil society, the social economy, as well as investors and consumers. Enabling and sustaining such cross-sector partnerships is challenging, as each have different norms, vocabularies, and constraints. It requires spaces where trust is deep enough for collaboration to flourish. Orchestrators are the glue that makes this collaboration and cooperation possible. They are not only the bridges between groups, but they create the spaces where those actors can build a shared identity, learn to address conflict, and develop a common sense of purpose. And I believe that many of you in attendance today are ideally positioned to be these orchestrators. A critical challenge for orchestrators is to identify the levers that they can use to accelerate the change process. Through my work, I have identified 3 key levers for changing the institutional context to make the social economy the norm instead of the exception. First, we must change the legal infrastructure to better support the organizations and the cross-sector partnerships that aim to help address social and environmental problems. Second, we must adopt new accountability systems to ensure all organizations, not merely those in the social economy, are held to account for their social and environmental performance alongside their financial performance. Thirdly, we must explore how to unlock new sources of funding that will help sustain social businesses as well as cross-sector partnerships that tackle systemic social and environmental problems. Now, though social impact investing has grown, access to sufficient financial resources to sustain such initiatives remains a significant obstacle to change. The financing ecosystem still needs to evolve. This evolution can certainly be supported through government funding, but it is also important for the world of investing to change. It has to change its tools, and it also has, importantly, to change its mindset. I'm glad that we've gathered today to examine some of the tools that have been developed in support of this shift. This gathering enables us to discuss the impact of these tools, such as outcome-based financing, while still recognizing the ways in which they should continue to be refined and improved. In particular, we must be cautious that the funding mechanisms we design aren't further reinforcing the status quo rather than transforming it. In my work, I witnessed this technical trap. When change makers believe a deeply entrenched social problem can be changed through technical fixes. Transforming our social and economic models is not a technical process. It is an inherently political one that requires not only to agitate, but also to innovate and orchestrate. As such, I invite you to lean into your roles as innovators and orchestrators of this change. This requires being proactive and building relationships with people across sectors. My hope is that this summit will enable us to create and strengthen these connections. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Julianna. And after this very high level, very exciting opening, it's time to get more practical and to unpick some of these ideas. So I give the floor officially to Giulio and our esteemed first panel.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. First of all, thank you to Julie Battilana, who prepared this keynote for us, and which was really interesting, I think, because of course in the last year we had many new narratives on these tools, on this cross-sectoral partnership, and to be honest, I mean, narratives are great things, but sometimes especially when we have conflicting or divergent narratives, well, it's not easy to build a community around the specific topic, and that's a challenge for, well, there's a challenge always, but it's a special challenge when it comes to implementing new policy tools. So now what I would like to do, I'm just checking out, because there was Giovanna Melandr who was joining us, but it seems she has some issues in terms of the technical on the technicalities. So I would start. I don't know. Do you see me? Okay, excellent. Okay, I will start with Rudy Aernoudt. Rudy serves as a senior economic advisor in the chief economist unit at the Director General Internal Market, Industry, Entrepreneurship, and Small Medium Enterprise. And well, he's also a professor. He spent his career in the field of corporate finance. He knows very well everything about venture capital and especially the needs, the financial needs. So the how to build a policy initiatives supporting in financial terms the demand side of different different kind of enterprises. So I would ask you, Rudy, given that in her keynote speech, Julie plays for a radical change, and given your knowledge of the European market economy, what is your take on this? I mean, on this need for a radical change. Do you agree with this? Do you agree with the idea we are now facing the need for such a radical change?
Well, first of all, thank you, Giulio.
I think you are unmuted. Okay, excellent.
It's okay now? You can hear me?
Yes.
Great. We all become zombies, so we get used to it. So thanks, Giulio, for inviting me for this conference, because it's a very important conference, and I think it's right on time, because we are deciding all the programs in the Commission now, so it's really right on time. And on your question, I would say I fully agree with her, and I would even go further. I think we are not living in an era of change, but in a change of era. So it's a complete new paradigm, as Thomas Kuhn would say, defined on focus, on outcome, on impact. And we started with the Millennium Goals 20 years ago, even more. Then we went to the Sustainable Development Goals. And now this COVID crisis. And I think the COVID crisis should even accelerate this movement and should create, as Professor Battilana was saying, a change of mindset. And I think that's what we have to do now. It's about mindset, and money can help with that, but it's much more than money. It's mindset that's the most important. I would even say a disruption of mindset. And if I go back to the crisis, and you all know in Greek the word crisis, kritome, means taking decisions, seeing opportunities. So I think this crisis will lead us, will help us in that. And if we take together some distance, if we get everything where we are now, we take some distance. As the American philosopher Thomas Nagel said, the view from nowhere. There's an invisible virus. Nobody else has seen it. It breaks all supplies. It makes slowdown of the economy. It changes the whole economy. We are in panic. And so the question we should raise, why do we need the economy? This is the big question. And the answer is, of course, we need the economy, not for the economy, but we need the economy for the quality of life. Economy is not a mean. It's only a mean, nothing more than that. It's not an objective. So, and if COVID leads to increased inequalities, and Julia Battilana referred to that as well, if COVID leads to increased inequalities, as it does, economy is missing the target. So, and as the MIT professor Richard Sennett states, inequality is the Achilles heel of the economy. I agree on that. And therefore, that's the reason why the social agenda should be a priority, as the member of the parliament was saying. And I agree with him. It's not something from right or from left. So the radical change to me is we have to review the essence of the economy. And social economy should not deliver the alibi to those who don't want to change the economy. And this is the big danger. By isolating social economy, and the member of the parliament referred to that, is silo economy, by isolating and by measuring success by the number of projects, the number of people, the number of organizations, we reduce its impact and its possible impact on the whole economy. Let me compare. We all speak about fair trade. Everybody agrees on fair trade. But should not all trade be fair? By analogy, should not all economy be social? So I think we will achieve our goal if social economy is no longer an oxymoron, but a pleonasm. So I would say, let's not waste this crisis. Over to you, Giulio.
Thank you, Rudy. Well, this is really interesting, well, I think that one point in this change, and I like the idea of time of change of times. So this is a clearly we are on a paradigmatic shift. So we can't think to keep proposing the same conceptual frames on which we have been built a lot in the last century. I mean, I'm thinking about the social market economy in Europe, the welfare state, the social protection. I mean, we're not refusing all the good legacy we have from the last century, but still we are aware something is changing, and we cannot keep doing the same thing, business as usual. I mean, this is well, I'm not sure it's true, but usually there is this sentence attributed, this idea attributed to Keynes, no? When facts change, I change my mind. So I think this is really interesting, and we are exactly here for this. And to this extent, probably I would I would ask Mara Airold. She is the director of the Government Outcome Lab at Oxford University. She is an expert in the field of social outcome contracting, cross-sectoral partnership, social impact bond, and she spent the last years in the field, so she's an internationally well-recognized scholar. I would like to ask Mara, so would you say that social outcome contracting and cross-sectoral partnership are a tool, an opportunity for this change, and first and foremost for the public sector, I think. So would you agree with this, and how this change in the public sector could be shaped by these tools?
Thank you, Giulio. As you said, most of our work has been on social outcome contracts or instruments that bring an outcome focus. And we are based at the School of Government in Oxford, so we pay particular attention of how this instrument can support a public sector reform. And I really applaud Julie Battilana's call for this change and this changing paradigm and identifying the role of orchestrator, because much of the work I do has to do with the public sector entrepreneurs who care of acting as orchestrators. And there are many such people out there. What I observe in the past 5 years, looking at this space, is that the interest in paying for outcomes, putting outcome at the center, can be seen as an instrument to change how the public sector operates. It's a change of mindset, in particular in 3 ways. One, as Dragos said before, there is fragmentation. There are this silo thinking, different sectors. And if you think about spending in the public sector, any problem has an element that you need to go to social services, there is education, and there is housing. And all these interventions are siloed in different budgets. And you end up with a fragmented offer of services that often falls short of meeting the needs of our citizens. So if you define what is the outcome that we want to achieve, and you allow for different agencies to come together and contribute their particular skills and particular know-how to tackle the problem, as a public sector, we don't issue 10 different contracts, one for housing, one for mental health, one for education. We just issue one contract that says, this is what good looks like for me. Figure out who should work with you on tackling this problem. This is a change of mindset that allows to break through the structure where budgets are siloed in different organizations in the public sector. So I think public sector entrepreneurs who take outcome-based contracts and social outcome contracts as an opportunity to break the fragmentation have a great opportunity here to reform the public sector and tackling this problem. 2, we have this quite short political cycle, so short budgeting cycle. Like our administration is designed that way for good reasons, reasons of accountabilities, but often this leads us to be very responsive. We tackle a problem once the problem is there. We don't invest in prevention because prevention requires a longer cycle. And who takes credit for fixing a problem that doesn't arise? Very difficult. So these instruments, if they are used to access patient capital and link payment to the achievement of results that are beyond a political cycle and a budgetary cycle, can really open up the opportunity to see more preventative intervention. Do we have this patient capital? How do we create these opportunities? This is an interesting conversation to have, and public sector entrepreneurs are looking at these instruments. And finally, there is often a risk aversion and a difficulty of bringing change. Big change is always difficult. How do you bring innovation? Again, if you have a focus on outcome and you say, this is what I think good looks like, and this is how I know we have achieved it, but then go and sort out how you do it. This is a completely change of mindset. You don't tell people what you want to be delivered, the activities. You are just prescribing, like try to find a solution, and if what is you are doing is not good enough, you have the license to change it during a contract that we have. So this gives space to innovation. So I think it's a big challenge, but there is a lot of experimentation that is happening. And as Julie said, the change of mindset, but there are public sector entrepreneurs that are using this to change the role of the public sector as an orchestrator. So how do we bring collaboration, prevention, and innovation to bear? And I think these instruments have a role to play.
Now, okay, excellent. Well, I said a lot of positive things on what you just said, Mara. Unfortunately, I was muted, so I won't repeat what I said. But no, jokes apart, I think this is very interesting, and I mean, we have these two dimensions: the market on the one hand, and the public sector. And when you were mentioning, I mean, a pretty challenging set of changes we need to go through, especially in the public sector. I was thinking at Frank Lee, who is the head of division of the advisory service at the European Investment Bank, and he's now providing this kind of capacity building and support to many member states and administration. So, Frank, first of all, thank you for being with us. And so, what I mean, the question I have for you is, what can be done, and what are the key issues, the key challenges to build a stronger changing mindset in the public sector, based on the experience you have with the advisory service at the European Investment Bank? Okay, it looks the same thing that happens with Georgia. So let me try again. This is something we need to consider when we will be requested to give feedbacks on the platform. Okay, the thing is that I just turned on your audio, Frank, but it seems it doesn't work because we can't hear you.
Yeah, maybe not. Okay. So, I mean, first of all, let me just say congratulations to you and Georgia for pulling this thing together. I mean, I think apart from the IT troubles that we're having today, let's put those aside, because you're not paid to be IT specialists, so that's fine. We'll forgive you for that. But I think the fact that you pulled together these inspiring speeches reminds me of why I got into this subject in the first place, and it has been a number of years now that I've been trying to follow this thing from as a bit of an outsider, let's say, but precisely because of that role of moving from innovation to orchestration, as was said before, and I don't want to repeat things that have been said, and there have been some really good things said so far, and in fact I don't have much more to add, to be honest. But I think speaking from the experience that I personally have had, which is for many years now, we've played the role in the European Investment Bank to actually try to shift the mindset of the public sector from using grants to investing public money, with the idea of being it brings a certain discipline, it brings a certain efficiency. It's not to say that grants don't have a role to play. Clearly, they have a role to play, but also there's a role to play for financial instruments, for revolving public money. And I think this is exactly one of those areas where that makes sense. And it's also one of those areas where we see that challenge of shifting the mindset of the public sector. Obviously, I mean, a lot has been said about we need to work with the public sector to raise their confidence, their understanding, their capacity to deliver and shift away from paying for outputs to paying for outcomes. And that's obviously much easier said than done. We've realized that. In EIB Group, we obviously have our sister organization, the European Investment Fund. They have been investing in these sorts of things for quite some years now, setting up a social impact accelerator fund 6-7 years ago now. But I think what they realized, and which is why we got on board, is they realized that you can bring the investors into this space, but at the end of the day, you need a demand to come from the public sector. You need someone to actually launch an outcomes contract, and that has to be the public sector. And so, under the European Investment Advisory Hub, which was something created under the Juncker Plan and the Investment Plan for Europe, we thought, let's pilot something that can reach out to the public sector in particular, that can build the capacity, build their confidence by actually sharing experiences and knowledge of what's been happening in the market. And let's try to see if we can build the demand in a way to come from the public sector on that side. And we thinking that on the investors would then come. That's also perhaps a bit of a short way of summarizing what the challenge is on the investor side. But let's focus on the public sector for now. So we started this pilot. We were inspired a lot by the Finnish Innovation Fund Sitra, which actually came to us as well back in I think it was 2016 or so. They had launched this social impact bonds, many social impact bonds, but one that's probably the most famous is tackling migrants and getting them into employment in Finland. And this we saw actually as very inspiring. Why? Because it was actually the first time we saw something being scaled up, something being created at a quite a significant size, 15 million euros, which actually, in my mind at least, was a catalyst to bring in institutional investors. We felt that this is a market which could be developed further and scaled up. We haven't got there yet, and there's big challenges around it. There's big reasons why we can't do that yet. But we do feel that this is something that has to be worked on, and working on the public sector in particular is extremely important. So we set up this platform inspired by Sitra, working with Sitra at the beginning under the European Investment Advisory Hub. It's called the Social Outcomes Contract Platform, Advisory and Investment Platform. And essentially, we're working with a number of the partners, recognizing that we didn't want to recreate the wheel, as it were. So, various colleagues on the call today are working with us, European Venture Philanthropy Association, Mara and Go Labs, etc., to try and essentially stimulate the market and bring together good case studies. And of course, this is now a pilot for InvestEU, and as Elena was saying earlier, we see this now as being a continuation of what we want to do under InvestEU, also through the InvestEU Advisory Hub, and it's great to see that the Commission has obviously taken this on board. It's essentially launched this not just
Well, I don't know what happened. I don't know if it's Rudy who has to leave in a few minutes, that managed to kick out Frank. I don't know, Rudy, if it's your move, but in any case, you managed to have the floor, so you will be able to join your next meeting on time. I will ask you just a final question for you, and I will merge the two I was thinking about. The first, so basically, what does it take to make the social economy, which is another side of this cross-sectoral partnership? What does it take to make social economy redundant in the sense that you were referring at the beginning? So all the economy should be social, and so no need to specify more on being social. No, something that should be like by default. And and in these, how do you see the future of these new tools in light of the changing European context, especially after the crisis, the pandemic? Okay, well, every time we have to change the audio, it's really painful. Well, actually, Frank managed to open his audio before, and
yeah, I think I have it.
Okay. Yes.
First of all, I promised I didn't kick Frank out. Promised. I'm not guilty, not in the even third degree. But going back to the question, how can you make all economies social? Well, I think we should go back to the evidence. You know, I'm a simple economist, philosopher. What is economy about? Huh? Our handbooks, what did they say? Optimal use of scarce resources. That's what's the basic definition of economy. So it is not about maximizing financial return. It's about maximum impact for the society and for the quality of the life of the human being. That's economy. That's really the evidence of economy. And that's why every investment has to be combined. I see that Frank is back. You get the floor back in a couple of minutes, Frank. So every investment is linked to impact. So it's not about financial performance. It's about social and environmental income. And so people might say, and what Frank was saying, public economy, we can do it. But I think if you look to the private sector, things happen. And I give you 3 short examples. Look to the Z generation, young people. They want to work for a company that does something for society, not a company that pays the higher salary. It's a completely change of mindset. Look if the companies own an ESG score, environment, social governance. Those companies, and I'm looking into the Shapiro for those who are economists, they have the least volatility. This is good for the value of the company. So doing something for the social, doing something environment is good for the value of the enterprise. And by the way, I don't know if you have seen the historical decision yesterday by ExxonMobil. The shareholders decided to put environmental activists into the board. This is a change. And this BlackRock, one of the biggest VCs in America. So you see these changes. Third example, after COVID, people will say, what's happening with my money? Where do I invest in? And so indeed projects, for instance, helping prisoners to learn or helping people to get out of poverty will be a good investment. So these examples show that it's not economy on the one hand and social economy on the other hand, but that even the private investors, they will look for something for that. I think the big problem we have, and I will speak 1 second as a philosopher, we are all children of Plato. And Plato is thinking in dualisms. We say economy versus social economy, employee versus employers, efficiency versus social exclusion and inclusion. Well, regular economy versus social economy. Well, this thinking, this is what leading to the silos, and that's what the MEP was referring to. And social economy, if you look, has in fact been created by opposition. We refute the administrative burden of the state, and we refute the profit of the private. So it's a kind of a third kind, as Dominic Meda would say, a third kind of economy. And what in fact did the economy do? The state said first, we are going to recruit people. That's our social impact, Bismarck. And then Weber said, yes, but this is the inflation of the bureaucracy. We have to find a solution. So in fact, what the state did, they outsourced the social economy to this third kind economy. But we all know if you outsource something, you only do it for one reason. Because you think that those who do the outsourcing, who get the outsourcing, are more efficient than those who did it before. So the essence of social economy is efficiency. That's how it all started. And if you see, friends, in the European Commission now, we, in the post-industrial, the updated industrial strategy, which was published last month, we speak about ecosystems. We have 14 ecosystems. We don't speak about sectors anymore. And one of these ecosystems is proximity and social economy. This shows that the social economy is part of the economy. And if you look to InvestEU, where we finance social innovation, migration, well, the basic issue is impact. We want to measure the social outcome. We want to state the economic viability of the projects. So to finalize on your conclusion, personally, I think if you do only payment by results, and I'm referring to what Mara saying, sometimes might be quite ambiguous, because this could lead to creaming, we only help the best, or to parking, those who are far away from the market, we don't take care of that, and that might be a problem. So personally, I'm a big fan of the social impact bonds, because even if it costs more per outcome than the traditional funded program, it's a way to experiment and to innovate. And if it doesn't work, you shut down the program. And if it works very well, you let it take over by traditional financing. And my recommendation would be that we should set outcome targets, combining frequency outcome with the binary. Because if you only use binary, then you increase the risk of fraud. And there's an incentive for creaming and parking. So if you combine both, then it's much better. You can take account to the target group, to the who is doing what are the objectives. And I think, moreover, it allows the public authority to calculate if the cost for the social impact bonds, which is higher, is outweighed, for instance, by reduction of unemployment. So finally, I think we need to closely align those outcomes with the policy intent and linking the payments to the actual measured additional impact, because this would lead to a better value for public money, and this would make it easier to attract private investors, including philanthropic investors, but including corporate investors. So that's in fact how I see the future of social economy as economy. Thank you, Giulio.
Thank you, Rudy. Thank you very much. I think this is very, very interesting, because it brings us to look at the financial side also. And to this extent, I was thinking that probably Frank, that was not kicked out by Rudy, who has to leave now. But I don't know. We don't know what happened, and we apologize for this platform that seems pretty messy. But what I would say is that this financial side, of course, is crucial, and the challenge is, aligning the mindsets of different actors. So you have the public sector, Frank, you were mentioning before, that needs to go through some changes, and then you have the financial sector as well. So would you, let's say, elaborate on these maybe taking from where you left before the being kicked out by Rudy, and then elaborate a bit on this financial side.
Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, great. Sorry, I don't know what happened there. I was kicked out. Maybe my enthusiasm got too much and the computer shut down on me. Just a few words. Again, Rudy was basically saying the right words as far as I'm concerned, in terms of, and I think Julie mentioned as well in her speech, this idea that if we leave it just to the private sector, then there's this concern that there's this drive towards profit maximization. Essentially, we're not correctly accounting. She mentioned accountability of impact, making sure that we take into account all externalities that investors need to be aware of. So I'm very much in favor of the idea that this is not just something that can be left to the private sector to find solutions for. Of course, private sector often comes up with good ideas and innovates and finds solutions that sometimes the public sector is not able to do by themselves. And that's obviously the whole agitation and innovation aspect of what we were talking about earlier. But I think in order to scale this thing up, and in order to prevent some of the, let's say, the creaming, I think that Rudy mentioned, and let's say the private sector taking advantage of the public sector, we need the combination of these resources. And that's why, again, I refer to EU funds, I refer to InvestEU as being a way in which the public sector can bring investment into this process, obviously with the idea of leveraging the private sector at the same time, finding that patient capital, and that's obviously where philanthropic investment also comes into play. And you know, because if this thing is driven purely by risk and return, and I would argue that risk is not properly, is not properly established in this particular sector, because it is very nascent and it's quite difficult to externalize these things, then I think that's clearly where the public sector investment side has a role. So public sector has to be involved on both sides. It has to be involved in actually procuring these services, so building the capacity of the public sector to contract these services, but also potentially having a role on the investor side, coming in and actually, helping alongside private investors to invest in the right social enterprises, to find the right solutions, and through that process reduce the risk for the private sector, so that essentially we get to a level where the returns are low enough to justify this intervention by the private sector. It's an iterative process, but a lot of examples are now happening in Europe, and I think we're heading in the right direction.
Thank you, Frank. I was thinking, because I would like to make a question to Mara, because I was thinking, I don't know if you remember one of the first social impact bonds that was implemented in I think it was around New York, or so Riker Island case. Well, that case, basically, I was really surprised because at a certain point, basically it failed. So the treatment that was provided to ex-offenders wasn't working. And so, this meant that no payment was done. And I mean, all the things that are, let's say, attached to the failure of the service in reaching the outcomes. And at the time, I remember I was going through the press and trying to find some kind of critical examination of what went wrong, and instead I was really surprised because I found a lot of articles on the newspapers, especially in the US, but also something here, and the overall idea was, wow, it failed, but no one penny no one public penny has been spent to prove that that treatment doesn't work. Now, things are usually more complex. So I'm making things very, very simple. But this story is to say, are we really building a market for outcomes, or are we probably building something more? I mean, it's a market that is not just focused on outcomes, but probably it's more, because there is these things of the knowledge that this social outcome contrast is able to generate, which should have some value. I think so. Probably, I mean, through the outcomes, we are building a broader market. So, what's your take on this, Mara?
This is a very big question, Giulio. I think many things have been said already.
Oh well, but you have 30 seconds, so
okay.
It should be enough. No, I'm joking.
No,
take your time.
I think often we talk about a market for outcomes, and a market has price, and we are experimenting, and we can price outcome. And often, this looks like a technical fix, and there are technical aspects that we need to look for, but it's really the change of mindset that we need to consider. So I think, as Frank said, to pay for outcomes, we need to invest in a different way to hold people to account. There is a change of accountabilities. People are accountable for delivering outcomes, and so we need to build on the competencies of the public sector and other players to know how to measure outcomes, which outcomes is a good outcomes, and there might be a risk of creaming and parking if we don't do things properly. But first, we learn from this. If we know when it happens, we can design better metrics. And two is something I don't have much patience for. It is true, maybe the instrument is not perfect, but what is the alternative? So how much bad service is being provided by contracts where we never measure the outcome? And we don't talk about it because we don't measure it. So it's true, in some cases, there are bad practices, there are techniques, there is improvement that is taking place to try to moderate those, but we always need to think about, is the alternative better? So I think there is a change of accountabilities, and we need to invest in competence. So the work that we do at the GoHub, the work that Frank is doing with his platform of building these competencies and helping people to know what to measure, what to look for, how to learn from others. This is fundamental. Two, there is a change of working across sector. And the keynote at the beginning said that there is a different vocabulary and people need to learn to work with each other. It takes time. You can't mandate people to trust organization in other sector and have this flexibility. But the price is high and is worth pursuing. And trust, anthropologists teaches us, only comes from shared experience that take time. And these contracts require people to design the contract together. It's not off the shelf much of the time. And often we hear discussion about, the transaction costs of these contracts are quite high. It might be true, it is true to an extent, but there are also transaction benefits. So the time it takes to agree together what good looks like, how we want to measure it, what we will do if things change along the way, this is an investment in the relationship, in having the flexibility. And we were observing how the social outcome contracts in the UK change as a response of a crisis. And many of them already had a strong relationship to change how they deliver things on the ground. So there was an investment up front that paid out, and often we don't measure that. And finally, I think it's, as Elena Flores said at the beginning, there is a lot of experimentation that is worth doing. Experimentation means learning. And we talk about outcome payer, so let's buy the outcome. When we buy the outcome, we also need to buy the data, the insights, and the learning. Often we commission a new way of working, and there are players that learn from this, put the learning back. And so universities have a role to play. The platform that Frank is heading has a role to play. When we buy the outcome, we need to say, I'm going to buy the data, I'm putting it out, I'm buying a case study, you need to give me time to write this up because we need to share those insights. And so I think we need to accelerate this learning if we want to go to this place. It might take some time, but everybody talks about, capitalism is dead, there is this the double and triple bottom line, that is a new norm. It's a big change, and we are at the edge of this change. It's exciting, but the experimentation will require learning along the way. Let's be intentional with the learning.
Well, this is a mindset shift. I think, for instance, even for those of us who have spent sometimes in the field, because, for instance, this focus on this idea of, well, why don't we buy also data? We should buy data and knowledge. I mean, this is exactly a key point that probably at the beginning of the debate on social impact bond was not so clear. So this is interesting because it gives us, the perspective, and it makes us understand and see that I mean, we are making, we are moving. We are not just, repeating and proposing and advocating for a tool, which would be I think at the end of the day a bit naive. No, I mean, we have a big change, a paradigm shift, and you wake up, say, okay, let's go with this tool. No, it's not about the tool. It's about what the tool could give you in terms of this broader change and mindset shift. So, for instance, this point on basically buying knowledge, the learnings. I mean, this is something that, for instance, in the public sector was not so clear a few years ago, except for those working a bit on, and this is, let's say, the spot I have to make for my Directorate General. I mean, we are the Joint Research Center. We work providing evidence-based policy, evidence for the evidence-based policy making. But except of this, for these cases, I mean, this is something I believe really new. And to this extent, well, I have a final question for the two of you. And well, it's very broad. I mean, you can say whatever you want in this, because of course it's more kind of foresight exercise. So the idea is, okay, how do you see, given what we said and we discussed now, how do you see the future of social outcome contracts and cross-sectoral partnership in Europe? And if you had to make one recommendation to mainstream these tools, what would it be? Frank, do you want to go first? If we manage to reopen the microphone.
Can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay. I'll jump ahead of Mara there. Sorry, Mara. But I think, although I will quote you, Mara, you talked about one of the challenges in the public sector was the silo effect. I think the idea of outcomes funds, national outcomes funds, which can be set up at a cross-governmental level. And this is something that they did in the UK at a certain point. I think it was quite good in terms of moving the innovation along. It also takes away the idea that you need to find a specific ministry or a certain department that needs to pioneer this, and often the benefits go beyond that particular ministry, and that's always difficult to capture. So I think the idea of a national outcomes fund is definitely where I see the future. It's not the future in some countries, but in some countries it should be. I think it's a real shame in a way. There was mention of the Recovery and Resilience Fund earlier on in the conversation. That obviously it's a fantastic instrument in the sense that it is, as the Commission was saying, more focused on outcomes rather than inputs. The problem is that it's launched with a very, very tight implementation timetable, and that is obviously not very conducive to the types of stuff that we're talking about today. But other than that, I would have said put some of that money into a national outcomes fund, because that is essentially what it's designed to do. It's a shame that we don't have the time to work on it, but maybe there are member states out there that will set some of this money aside, and that would be a recommendation, and that's hopefully what we will be talking about sitting here 5 years from now. Thanks.
Thank you, Frank. Mara?
I want to make something that is very practical that I come across all the time when I'm approached about, we want to set up a social outcome contract. And is having clarity of why you're doing it. And there is a simple question you should answer to know if you know why you're doing it, which is, what is your exit strategy? Often I'm approached by governments, say, we need to set up more social outcome contracts, and there are not investors, and they're very technical questions. But if you ask them, why are you doing it? Like, what happens? Let's suppose you finance the social outcome contract. What happens at the end of it? And it's a simple question, it's very practical, but if you can answer the question, it means that you have clarity and intentionality. So if you're setting up something because you want to find an innovative way to tackle a problem, once you found it, you might mainstream the approach and you can fund it through grants or other ways. It doesn't matter, because the aim was the innovation. You will measure different things, you will manage the stakeholder in different ways, you will gather different type of learning. If your aim is to engender this collaboration, at the end of an outcome contract, you will have another one, but maybe it will be faster and you will have developed procedures, and so it will cost less to set up and less to run. But you need to think, what happens at the end of this contract Because once you answer the question, you know what you should pay attention to and what are the battles that you really need to fight. And, the world is less than perfect, so you need to make choices, but it will give you guidance. So whenever you enter like a conversation of let's set up a social outcome contract, what for is what happens at the end of it.
I want to thank Mara, Frank, Rudy for participating in the panel. Giovanna Melandr was expected to join, but then she had some technical issues and she wasn't able to get into the room. But I think this first policy panel was really interesting, and probably, it would be, it paved the way for the second panel, which is a showcase panel, but I shut up and I leave the floor to Georgia, who will moderate the second panel and will introduce the new speakers.
Yes, thank you, Giulio, and thank you to all the panelists from the first discussion. It was really interesting, and although we advanced in time, I did not have the heart to interrupt because it was very useful. And I repeat again, we'll be writing a report, policy notes based on that discussion. So it's just the beginning of the conversation. No words and ideas will be lost. So thank you for airing out your views. I just wanted to have one technical announcement before we proceed to the second panel. And it is, I see that we keep having some participants join and some that are thrown out. I think it's because people are trying to use the same link, maybe sharing with colleagues, and it doesn't work because the links, some of the links that are produced are very individual. So if you know people who are trying to join together with you, let them know they should speedily register at the USES website, and then they can join with their own links, and everyone can stay in the session. But in any case, there's a recording, and there will be materials after this, so everyone will know what was discussed. Now, coming up, we have a deep dive into some very exciting initiatives and experimentation. So we have really innovators, orchestrators that are leading pioneering efforts to make a shift in their respective areas. Again, here we have representatives from public government, support organizations, the investor perspective, and civil society perspective. I'm going to attempt to share my screen again very quickly so that I can do a quick mapping and introduction. Let me know if it works. Can you see?
Yes.
Yes, okay, great. So this is who we have up next, and I'm going to introduce them briefly up front because then I will have individuals conversations with them in the time that we have remaining. So we have about 50 minutes, so that's 10 minutes each for deep conversation. But the journey that we'll take, we'll start our tour in Italy with a deeper look at the Italian Social Innovation Fund. That was a central level facility launched to support local authorities, and Fiorenza has been supporting local authorities over the last year. Then we moved to the Netherlands, where Astrid, who is a champion within the government, is about to launch the second stage of the Brabant Outcomes Fund. So she'll tell us how she's innovating from within and how they are adapting the social outcomes contracting approach. And our journey will then take us more topically into the most, Next up, we have the investor perspective from Maha, who is behind the BNP and EIF co-investment impact fund. She'll give us the investor perspective on that. It's very exciting because it's a multi-country facility. And importantly, it is supported by the European investment facility in this space. And next up, we will go more topically into one of the most urgent themes in Europe when it comes to social inclusion, and this is Roma inclusion. So we'll hear from Julianna, who is leading the innovative HERO pilot that was mentioned previously on behalf of the Council of Europe Development Bank. It's a very novel orchestration effort to stimulate local partnerships and access to housing and empowerment for Roma. And then last but not least, I will speak and exchange with Petru, who will bring in the voice of civil society and the efforts of the Roma Entrepreneurship Development Initiative to improve the lives of marginalized communities, and how he's looking at social outcomes contracting and a possible outcomes fund for inclusion. I'm going to stop sharing the screen now. I hope you're able to see this, and it will be useful. All right. So then, I start with Fiorenza first. Thank you for being with us. Can you tell us the Italian Innovation Fund? What was behind the intention to launch it? To launch this fund for the capacity in the sector, we've heard a lot about the need for upgrading capacity. What was your experience with it? How did it work?
Hi, thank you, Giorgio, for having me. I think my case links wonderfully with what have been said by the previous panel. So indeed, the National Social Innovation Fund in Italy is an outcome fund established at central government level by the Council of the Presidency of Ministries. So as Frank was mentioning before, quintessentially interdepartment function, signaling the will of the Italian government to make outcome contracting some very important policy, but also targeting very interestingly local authorities in a capacity building effort. So the fund, which has a budget of roughly 25 million of grant funding, and then we come back to that, was launched in 2019. It targets cities, so municipalities and metropolitan areas from all across the country, but they need to work together with at least 3 other partners. So implementing organization, be it private or third sector or even public, of course, investors and independent evaluators. They need to work on outcome contracting in 3 key areas: social inclusion, cultural promotion, and education. And it's a characteristic which I think is really interesting and innovative, is that the fund foresee 3 different stages of development. The first one, each one is prodromic to the other, and each one will last up to a year. The first one is about implementing a feasibility study and an action plan, and 21 municipalities with their consortia will be funded. On the second phase, the feasibility study will be piloted, so small-scale pilot to implement what has been put together in the first phase. And in the last phase, and only 8 consortia are supposed to reach this phase, there will be a scaling up. And why this is important? Because the first year is mainly about building trust between the partners, knowledge within the municipalities and beyond the municipalities with the private sectors and investment work. And then you still have the room in the second year to really test and fine-tune what works and what doesn't. So we are now in the first phase. We have around 1/3 of the project which reached the end of this first phase and submitted a feasibility study. We have another 10 projects which are nearly there, and then a few ones who are in the early phase. I just give you a glimpse, a few numbers, which are interesting, I think. When it comes to what are the priority outcomes, over 2/3 of our projects are targeting social inclusion. And of course, this signals a strong need of innovating in this particular sector. When it comes to implementing partners, more than half of the delivery partners come from the third sector, signaling a strong link with the social economy, but nearly 25% are pure for-profit business, meaning that there is an interesting space for collaboration even there. And for financial partners, banks are by far the most important financial partners. And we are not talking about specialized banks, but about high street banks. And this is also interesting. And then, of course, we have also specialized funds. Last stats, just to give you an insight, because another important fact is we are building a knowledge base, an amazing knowledge base out of this project. So we spent a lot of time, particularly in this first year, talking about the basics of outcome contracting. So how do you identify outcomes? How do you qualify them? How do you quantify them? And for the about 12 projects which reached at least half way submission, we know that all of them identify the outcome. 60% qualified it, but only 30% managed to quantify it. And so to really find the right indicators and in most cases also to monetize it. So it's a long journey and a very collaborative one, and building capacity and trust takes time.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I know a lot of countries are looking at Italy now and wishing they had their central government launch such a capacitating initiative to prepare the public sector at the local level to step into such arrangements and to prepay, essentially. And however, the fund in Italy evolved, I know it had different ambition at the start, it's different now, but it is there and it is doing the work of capacitating. But now we also know that there's always resistance to change, especially when something comes top down from central level. So tell me a little bit more about what was the feeling within the local level authorities, the municipalities you work with and handhold, essentially. How did you overcome this resistance to change? How did you actually manage to build trust within? And a bit of an insight of how did you go about going beyond cashable savings?
So, Georgia, I think you are very right. I mean, it was fundamental to have the central government starting this initiative, but of course, working at the local level, it's totally different. And particularly at the beginning, there was very little awareness of what outcome contracting was. And most of the municipalities strongly relied on their technical partners and implementing partners. So it was hard to really convince them that they really wanted to be in charge and to learn and to really get a stake and a grip into what implementing an outcome contract really meant for them. So how did we build this trust within the local municipalities, but also, and maybe even most importantly, between the municipalities and the private partners or public partners or investing partners? So what we did was to build a safe space with no central government implied for the municipalities and the partners, where they could learn all together and really debate, being totally at ease about the technicalities, but also about what they really wanted to achieve. As Mara said, this really simple question: why would you do that? Of course, nobody would have embarked in such a trip if there wasn't some grant money available and strong political backing. But once they did that, what was really, key was to allow this space to admit you didn't know something, to work with experts, which were selected as neutral technical experts, which often didn't know some of the stuff, because one thing is the outcome cycle, one thing is really working on how to link the savings into the budgeting of maybe 4 departments of the municipalities which are implied by the outcome contracting, and to come up together with solutions. And what you were mentioning, which is really important, how do you go beyond actual savings? And what's the beauty of outcome contracting beside everything, the catalyzing power? So you can really pay for soft outcomes, intermediate outcomes, non-cashable outcomes, and in this way pinpoint that those are as important as savings. So there has been a lot of room for discussion, co-design, and experimentation, and this was particularly important, for instance, when it comes to reaching out to very hard to reach groups, which are normally not even in the scope of what the municipalities were doing, but outcome contracting give you that space for experimentation.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And our time is advancing, but in 30 seconds or so, your top 3 learnings from the process that you have witnessed so far.
It takes time. Building trusting is fundamental. It takes time, and it's a learning curve for everybody, including the experts. That's my main learning. It's worthy. Second learning, even if it takes some time and even if transaction costs might seem high, the learning experience goes well beyond the single outcome contracts. And what strikes me is that within our municipalities, they are calling in their colleagues and already exploring ways to apply the principles to other challenges and innovation projects. Third main outcome, which is something we need to work in the future, we should put more time into sharing our experience, what Mara was mentioning before. So putting it out and opening the floor also for stakeholders who are not implied in the projects, because it might well solicitate a snowball effect, and that's what we really need to change the paradigm, really.
Great, excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We move to Astrid, who is, as I mentioned, a champion within the public sector. Astrid, the Brabant Outcomes Fund is very famous for being very innovative, a different take on social outcomes contracting, and you've pioneered that in 2018. You told us that putting money on the table really gets people conversing. And you put 1 million on the table in 2018. Now you're already thinking of scaling and preparing the launch. You're up to 7 million. I think you said, as a government, hoping to attract a diversified range of investors in the second round. Tell us a bit about how you started and what you're envisioning for the second round and how you're adapting the SOC approach, what you're famous for.
Thank you for this great introduction, Georgia. So actually in 2018, a couple of observations lead to the start of the fund. It was about the story that we always tell about our region, that we only focus about the economic situation. We say we have a very strong economy. And on the other side, the gaps in our region are growing, actually. Gaps between high and low educated people, and but also the gaps between people who can afford green energy and the group who can't afford it. And so actually our societal challenges are becoming more and more complex, and we cannot solve it by only focusing on the economic side, of course, which was also mentioned before by the previous speakers. And I also saw a lot of entrepreneurs, initiatives who really find solutions for a more inclusive green economy. But when I had conversations with them, then they say they had very difficulties to scale, actually. So I did a survey between a big group of these initiatives and entrepreneurs to better understand what is the role of the government in this whole barricade of not being able to scale their impact. And of course, looking back, it was not how can I say it? It was actually obvious that we play a big role in this whole story actually as a government because of our silent way of working, because we have all our budgets in programs. We say we are there for societal impact, but what we do is only looking at financial profit or financial savings, which is really strange actually. And also the really strong a border between what is from the public sector and what is from the private sector. So we need a more holistic approach, more cooperation, more looking at societal impact. And I thought, if I say to my colleagues that we have to work in a different way to really solve societal challenges, then they would agree. But on the other hand, they will just continue to do the way they work as they always do. So I thought we need a kind of methodology or a practical thing to work on together to really understand and learn how to do it in a different way. So that's why I set up the Brabant Outcomes Fund. And in the first investment round, we do it in a way based on social impact bonds. Because I thought it's a really nice way of cooperation between entrepreneurs, private investors, and the regional government. We really focused on societal outcomes and not on financial savings, and I think we somehow succeed in doing that. And the money, the 1 million that Georgia mentioned, was coming from only the social department. So by the time that they asked me to set up a second round, I thought we learned a lot of lessons in the first round, but we are not there yet because my organization is still not really working in a more holistic way, and there is still there are borders between all the different departments. So what do we need to really make a next step? So that's why I thought I need outcome payment from several departments. So I succeed to get budget from, for example, the energy department, the agro-food department, economic department, and so on. And on the other hand, I thought that in the social impact bond construction, actually is only focusing on beginning entrepreneurs who need to show their impact. But I also saw a lot of entrepreneurs who are there already for a longer time, who have a healthy business model, but they also want to make a next step in contributing to social and green economy. And when they knock on the doors of the banks, then the banks say what you want, for example, to make your food chain more circular, we cannot give you a loan because the risks for us are too high. Actually, that is also what Frank was mentioning before. So I thought we also have, in the next round of the fund, we have to focus also on this group of entrepreneurs. And it means we need to have also the possibility for loans, but loans that also have this social outcomes contracting way of working. You get a loan, but upfront, we have to agree upon the results that you want to achieve with the loan that we give to you. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm in the middle of the process of finding investors who want to co-invest with us as a government. And the regional government gave 7 million for the loan part and 3 million for the outcomes payment part. So yeah, that's actually what we are doing now. And I hope after the summer we can really launch the second investment round.
Mm-hmm. Thanks a lot. You have been very comprehensive now in your answer, but in 2 minutes or so, can you tell us a bit more about how you're engaging with investors, what your experience is from the government, how you build up the courage and confidence to step into these arrangements yourself?
I think for the first investment round, and that was also mentioned before, building trust is so important. and also not only building trust, but also, for example, to get my colleagues joining me in telling the stories about these social entrepreneurs that really do good work. Because I experience, for example, when I talk to my colleagues and ask them for help or to cooperate with me, that at first they get a little bit stuck in our system. Then they say, oh, I cannot help you because my function is to do this and this and this. And then when I tell them what I'm doing and what I'm trying to achieve, and to tell the stories about all these people, citizens that benefit from these social entrepreneurs, then it's a kind like they open their heart and then they say, oh, I will try to stretch a little bit the rules and then I will help you. So I think it's so important that we step out of our professional perspective and really look at ourselves like we are all human beings, and we have responsibility in contributing to a world that is fair for everybody. And yeah, maybe that's, I hope that's a little bit an answer to your question.
It is, and it is very inspiring also. And to everyone listening, Astrid's work is available online, but also the EU advisory platform is doing a study on the Brabant Outcomes Fund. And we will be delving into that as a case study deeper in the follow-up to this conference. But yeah, Astrid has said it. It started with her, with personal awareness, and you need this type of people within organizations in order to move change forward. But I go to Maha next, and Maha is another such change maker inside the BNP Paribas. Maha, the EU supported impact fund of BNP Paribas is also very famous. Can you tell us a bit how this cooperation started and what are the transactions that you have supported so far for social impact bonds in the different countries?
Yes, hello to everybody. How it started, I need to say that what Astrid is saying is very much rings a bell from our side, because it started by people. Actually, it was a bet. It was quite a fancy bet, because it was like, okay, let's build a market on a very niche product that you only have like a few in the world, but we want to believe together with the EU, with the EIF, on this product, so that we want to together build a fund that would invest in social impact bonds across Europe, across the European Union. This was our bet. It was that, okay, the market is going to grow. So let's try to, build a financial capacity, investing capacity. So it started quite a years ago, but it started in 2018. And we finally signed very early 2020. So it was a long run, because there was a lot of new things to put in the mentalities in both organizations, big organization, not the government, but as the same type of complications. So it's a 10 million, for the time being, it's a 10 million fund that is managed by BNP Paribas Asset Management. And how does it work? It's just that the EIF and BNP Paribas Group both put 5 million together in this fund to invest for equal commitments in social impact bonds that are structured across the European Union, because we have this scope together that we aligned on. So as for today, so the scope was to generalize and make more visibility to social impact bonds all across Europe. It's to test also societal innovations and have this investment use as a leverage to test innovations and what we want also, if some innovation work in a country, it could be replicated in another. It could be replicated in another one. This was also one of the purpose. And the third purpose was to encourage maybe more mainstream investors to say, okay, EIF, BNP Paribas, they are two quite strong organizations. Maybe that if they are betting on this product, maybe also we mainstream investor can follow up. So it was also one of our purpose was to, drag around other institutional investors to invest in social outcomes. For the time being, we invested in 4 social impact bonds across Europe. So there are 3 in France and 1 in Belgium, on thematics such as childhood protection, school dropout, and combat homelessness for NEETs and young people in Belgium, and it's invested up to 4.4 million. So we have a little bit left, but there are much more coming.
There are much more coming, I know, from your preparatory work in other countries, but also the French landscape is very dynamic. So we've recently heard about different commitments of thematic envelopes by different ministries. So you have an evolving pipeline. Tell us a bit of what's going on in France and how you're engaging with the government directly.
So yes, the French came a little bit later on social impact bonds with the first call for project in 2016 that was very broad without any thematic. It was just to feel the appetite of the market on this product. And victim of the success, I would say, we took the experience of what happened during those first years. And in 2020, there was a real engagement and commitment of the French government through the Ministry of Finance that actually launched thematic call for projects, which it's not really an outcome fund in a technical way, but it's an envelope. So for the first one was launched by the Agency for Environment that launched a call for project and labelized for 30 million projects to be contractualized as a social impact bond. So there are 8 projects. There's another one launched by the Ministry of Finance. I'd had 4 winners. We just got the results on equalities of chance, economic equalities of chance. There's a third one that was launched for 10 million euros by the Ministry of Employment, also around thematics for the youth to come to employment, defavored youth to come to employment, and also people with psychological troubles, also to help them get into the employment market. And there are 2 more, from the rumors we hear, there are 2 more coming on childhood protection and on homelessness. So there's a very dynamic landscape.
Very dynamic, we can say. Mindset shift seems to be taking place in France.
Yes.
But you're already working with the European Union facilities. We mentioned through the European Investment Fund. What else do you think is needed? Any quick calls on what more we can do on the EU level to support countries to move in the direction of France?
Well, first of all, I would say that our 10 million fund is not going to be enough. So if the EU wants to top up, we are very glad, because as you see, there's a lot of pipeline. So about 30 million pipeline. So it could be interesting to have the EU top up the fund for the first. And the second one would be actually maybe an outcome fund at the European level on thematics that cannot be dealt with on a national level, thematics that's maybe social inclusion, thematics that go across the frontiers and that should be considered in a global way, because if you solve it in a country, it would just appear again in another one. So the thematic would be all across Europe. So I guess there's an avenue for the EU to to have such an outcome funding across Europe. That would be my call.
Thank you, and we hope to heed that call. And it looks promising from what we heard from the political opening so far. Thank you, Maha. And I move to Julianna next. Julianna, thanks a lot for being with us. You're also innovating within the Council of Europe Development Bank. You tell us a bit about the new EU Hero pilot. And to be fair, this is a pilot that was given to the Commission by the European Parliament. And when we arrived at the doors of the Council of Europe Bank, what was it, a year and a half ago, we were told this is no banking and not marketable enough, but you took it on. We've managed to put together a great project. Tell us a bit of what is expected, what HERO is about as methodology.
Thanks, and good morning. Thanks for having me. So yes, it's just, as Georgia knows the project as well as I do, so we decided to take it on. Again, it's not something the bank has done before, but we're very excited about starting. So HERO stands for Housing and Empowerment for Marginalized Roma. The aim of the project is to address socioeconomic exclusions of disadvantaged people, and specifically marginalized Roma. So we will do it, or we plan to do it in two main ways. The first one focuses on housing. So by providing microloans to disadvantaged people for the self-construction of housing. And we will do this by incentivizing financial intermediaries to make those microloans by giving them a risk mitigation mechanism so that they're able to make microloans, which perhaps they would have been more reluctant to do otherwise. And those microloans, it's important to note, that will be used for self-construction of housing, for the beneficiaries to renovate or construct the houses themselves, which then will belong to them. So it's about personal property. And the second component, alongside the housing, relates more to employment and life skills. So selected beneficiaries will receive counseling, social support, employment and life skills training. So that's the project in a nutshell. We are just beginning. We're just beginning actually in the selection of implementing partners on the ground. The project will be piloted in 3 countries, in Slovakia, Romania, and Bulgaria. The budget is roughly 3 million. And yeah, it's just the beginning. So we've got big ambitions, but let's see.
It's an exciting beginning, and this is all about stimulating cross-sectoral collaborations on the local level, correct? Tell us what these are going to look like, and what are different roles of the partners we hope to activize.
Mm-hmm. So to begin with, it's a partnership between the European Commission and the Council of Europe Development Bank. So we're used to working together. The EU is the largest donor and a privileged partner of the bank. And up to now has contributed 615 million since 1996. So it's definitely not the first time we're working together, but it's the concept of HERO was nested in this partnership, which came about during the conceptualization of the project. So as Georgia mentioned, it's been 1.5 years that we've been exchanging, we've been communicating with a variety of stakeholders on the ground, and organizations and individuals who are experts in Roma and housing, and in the 3 countries concerned. And we plan to bring forward this concept of partnerships as we move into implementation, and to expand the role of partnerships. And we will need to have different stakeholders who will have to come together to make a change. So we're talking about local partnerships that will be established with local NGOs, financial intermediaries, local administration authorities, public officials, social workers, the private sectors, and of course the Roma community and the non-Roma community in the locations themselves. So the idea behind HERO, I think, is the more relevant individuals and institutions are involved in the common goal, the easier it will be to achieve it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. And this is not a typical SOC project, but it has a very strong outcomes orientation. There are definite changes that we want to see in 2 or 3 years when the first pilot round finishes. Tell us a bit about these outcomes that are expected.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we had big ambitions, and I think especially the Commission came in with really big ideas. But we have to be realistic, as we know, and we have a time frame and we have a budget which is limited. But I think the first ambition of HERO is to test whether the model of HERO works and whether it can be expanded to other countries in Europe. Second outcome that we're looking at is cross-sectoral partnerships, as I just talked about before. And then, of course, the more tangible aspect, which would be contributing to decreasing the rate of housing deprivation of marginalized Roma, and also to make a contribution to decreasing their financial exclusion and increasing their paid employment rate. More concretely, we're looking at about 15 municipalities who will, as a result of the project, will increase their awareness and capacity to improve the lives of marginalized Roma. And we're hoping that around 80 housing constructions will start, at least by the end of the project duration, and to get about 120 marginalized families with a better chance of a better income and a better employment rate. So it's definitely not just about building houses, although it begins with an H, housing, but about consistently working on delivering solutions for the marginalized Roma in this partnership way.
Thank you so much, Juliana, for telling the story. And I think HERO is really important as a pilot because it demonstrates that the Commission speaks about experimenting, but it also does experimentation and supports it. Of course, there's a lot more we can do and can be doing, since we're speaking about, as I said, one of the most urgent topics in the area of social inclusion, which is Roma inclusion. I would like to turn to Petru next. And Petru, you are the founder of the Ready NGO and fund, the Roma Entrepreneurship Development Initiative. Can you please tell us a bit the context in which you're working? What is the situation of Roma now in the post-COVID context? What is happening with investments? Where are investments flowing? Where they're not? And what do you see as the opportunities at the moment? You have to unmute yourself, and it's on the left side, the black bar. The microphone icon. So left side of your screen. No? That's a real pity because this is the voice of civil society.
Okay, now I think this works, right? Okay, very good. Thank you. So thank you very much, Georgia, for the invitation and for the great panel. I think the gender balance is now on the right side of where it should be. So I'm very happy to be on a panel where most of the panelists are women, especially on such a very interesting topic. Now, I am working with an initiative which is supposed to empower one of the largest ethnic minority in Europe, as well as the one which is really the most vulnerable, right? If we have to speak in these terms. And when we started 5 years ago or 6 years ago, also with a support from the Council of Europe Bank, we actually started supporting entrepreneurs to establish their own companies and develop the communities. The pandemic has actually forced us at the beginning to help a lot of the entrepreneurs to close down the companies. And to be honest, this has been extremely painful for us because on one hand, this is what the people needed. So they actually needed to fire some of the people in order for the company to survive. But it was completely against our mission. And what we're seeing is that the 1 year and a bit of the pandemic has actually wiped down many of the results that we've achieved in the past 5 years. So I think what we are currently looking at is, of course, we've all been in the pandemic, right? And we've all been affected, but not in the same way. So the people in the communities have actually been hit much harder. What we are doing, because I think this is what Georgia is asking, we're trying to look at how can we actually use some of the tools and some of the great things that COVID pandemic has brought onto us. And one of it is digitalization, right? So we're looking more and more of the fact that tools which make us communicate or which make us get in touch with each other are now much easier to use and also much cheaper. So we have a very small pilot program where we get Roma entrepreneurs working in their own communities, which before they would produce components or produce different things and then try to sell them on the local market. And what we do is we provide them a very simple digitalization kit, which is a tripod, some light system, a microphone, and a small smartphone to those that don't have. And then we enable them to stream themselves as they produce the products. And I have to say, this is extremely powerful. It doesn't cost much. It's really not that difficult. It takes us about a week to help them learn how to use the tools and stream on Facebook or stream on different things. And then once some of them have started doing this, they are able to sell towards Western Europe and not only to their local market. So I think this is a fantastic opportunity, and we would need to look much more closer at this sort of tools, which enable vulnerable communities to really benefit from what the COVID pandemic has brought us.
Mm-hmm. Thanks a lot. And your approach is very entrepreneurial, and I love it because it's rare for civil society organization, and especially in the Roma inclusion field. And so I know you have many market-based innovative solutions. You're doing your best. But the reason we invited you also on the panel is because we know that you have recently started looking into social outcomes contracting and realizing that you have to get engage with the public sector in a much better way.
Yeah.
In order to trigger change, because so far you have been filling the gaps maybe of where public services are failing. Now you want to engage governments and the new funding tools that are available in order to orchestrate a bigger and better change. Can you tell us a bit about what your thinking is and whether you were inspired by some of what you heard already on the pilot as practices in the West?
Absolutely. So I think when we started doing this, we were actually trying to kind of like fill in the gaps of what's actually missing and kind of like trying to improve it. And we realized that you cannot continue doing that. You cannot continue doing that because you would always kind of like try to fix something which doesn't work. And what we're currently trying to do is we're trying to be at the forefront, and we're trying to actually lead, if you want, the path towards what can you actually do to support the communities. Now, we've been talking a lot about money, right? And I think if you speak to the European Commission and if you speak to everybody, you're hearing out billions, and I cannot even imagine the amount of money that is available, right? Like if you put it in a stack, would you need a trailer, 2 trucks, whatever, right? In bills of 500. So I think that the money is not an issue, but the money hasn't been an issue in the past either, right? So there's always been a lot of money. There was always more money than ideas. I think we're speaking to George Soros at a certain point, and he was telling to his staff that he has more money than they have ideas of spending it, right? And he was actually quite annoyed. And I have to say, this is also true for the European Commission. And I think what we need to do is, of course, money is important, but then you need to have the courage to come in and try things that might fail. I think everybody's very much keen on trying something that would work. And then the other thing is we've been talking about ecosystems, right? But when we speak about ecosystem, we forget that one of the biggest problems is capacity, right? Capacity building. So when we speak about social outcomes contract, on one hand, we've been looking into this together with ECFIN, and I think ECFIN has been absolutely fantastic because they've really tried to bridge all of the gaps in supporting us to kind of conceptualize this. So the financial tools is one component, like how do you do this? What's the feasibility of an outcome fund for Roma communities across Europe? The other thing is, which are the service providers? So who's actually going to do it? And who's actually going to do it? I think somewhere in the morning was saying, doing it a bit more efficient than what the public authorities are doing it, or whoever's doing it now. So how can you actually improve this? And I think in order to do this, you need to support in building the ecosystem of service providers who are going to be able to help constructing the houses, improve the educational system, and so on. And all of this ecosystem building cannot be done with loans. All of this can be done only with grants, right? So the innovative use of grant funding and loans is extremely important. And what we've done in the past, I think ever since July of last year, we tried to engage with the European Commission, we tried to engage with the national governments in Romania and Bulgaria, and we've been, the governments have been extremely open to do this, and I think some of them are really keen on submitting proposals to the European Investment Fund for feasibility studies and really starting a very good conversation, a very serious conversation around the use of social outcomes for the Roma communities.
Thank you very much. Petru, just in 30 seconds, I will ask you if you have any final calls for what the EU can do, any messages that you want to be heeded. And in the meantime, just to tell to our friends and colleagues in the audience, if there are any questions, please feel free to pop them into the chat box. We'll have a little bit of time for questions and answers. But if you have any burning queries, anything that you want to get out of the previous case studies, do write it in the chat box. We will address. Petru, over to you.
Thank you, Georgia.
In your ideal world, in the next, 3 years, what would happen? What would the EU do?
I would say that what the EU should do is get a bit more courage and willingness to fail, right? To me, I come in from the private sector, and it's all of this perspective of failing fast and failing cheap. I think it's important to kind of try to have small pilots that you can approve very fast, small amounts of money, a few million euros, that help you develop and work out what works and what doesn't. When you work out something that does work, you actually need to kind of implement and do that much faster and at a much larger scale. I think this is the biggest challenge that we've had so far. You need to be able to move very fast for very small projects, and then implement once you have good results.
Thanks a lot. And I think the HERO project Julianna demonstrated is an evidence, testament to the fact that we are starting to test and experiment, also experiment with using the budget in new ways, EU funding that can support a single intervention through both grants and financial instrument in one go. So this is really good, but we hope to be able to do that much more, and hopefully be able to aggregate the learning across projects, and with having this courage, instill courage also in authorities across member states to further make the use of EU funding to experiment and pilot, innovate, and advance social change. Now, I don't see any questions per se in the chat box. I'll give you a few more seconds if you want to throw a query at one of the panelists.
Maybe I can ask Maha if any of the projects in Belgium or France are working with vulnerable communities like the Travelers, or
not specifically. None is really targeted on those populations, but there are within the population. They might be because, for example, in Belgium, it really targets people that are youth that are out of the radar. So it means almost neets and that are falling into homelessness, but they can be youth that just got out from prison, they can be young travelers, they can be refugees, so it's not specifically dedicated. But we are working on an impact bond specifically on refugees, for example, right now. It's not one that was specifically targeted by the government, but we are working on one on refugees insertion.
And the geography is Western Europe or Europe-wide?
Of the fund that we built, it's the European Union because of the mandate of the EIF. Okay. So it's European Union.
All right, we have a question from Janka. Thanks, Janka. Okay, it's about the transfer of experience from west to east, which I have always dreamed of. So Astrid, no, Fiorenza, but I will also pose the question to Astrid, whether you guys get queries from stakeholders in the CE region, Central and Eastern Europe, who are interested in setting up similar national funds, whether for building local capacity or supporting impact entrepreneurs to work more in the area of well-being. Do you get a request for sharing of experience and support from that region?
To be honest, not. But I guess, and it's a polite guess, that this is our fault because we didn't communicate at all outside the group of projects involved. We start doing that this year, and Janka, I'll let you my email. Please get in touch. We would be so happy to share our experiences and also maybe to spare you some mistake we did. And I think that's something we really need to do: share experiences, exchange, put some resources in common if possible, because it's important.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, my colleagues.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Florenza. We have to share more, and for our fund as well. So far, no questions from these countries. All over Europe and outside Europe, there are a lot of conversations and requests for sharing lessons. But I think we can do as next step, actually.
Mm-hmm. Indeed, I think this is where most of the work will be to activize and get the awareness and interest in Central and Eastern Europe, where often the needs are greatest. Just to promote a bit the EU SOC platform again, it is there because to support authorities that want to transfer and bring lessons to their geographies, so they can support both to innovate in the way Italy has done and the Netherlands has done. I know that the assignment that the EIB has for the case study in the Netherlands has some potential to test replication potential. But it won't be in Central and Eastern Europe, where there is no interest yet, so we need to awaken it together. There is a question from Hannah to Julianna. Julianna, you mentioned incentivizing financial intermediaries to engage in microloans for housing through risk mitigation. Do you also work with foundations, public benefit organizations as financial intermediaries? And how do you mitigate risk taking?
Thanks for the question. So for the microloans, we are thinking about financial intermediaries specifically. And as regards the risk mitigation mechanism, so the one that we have developed, but it needs to be elaborated with the partner that will be selected to implement the microloan component. It will be in the form of a grant, which will act as a sort of buffer for any losses. Mm-hmm. But we've allowed space for this to be discussed once we have selected the financial intermediary who will go ahead with the project in the specific countries. But it's a competitive process, so it will be, I should probably have mentioned that. So there'll be a call for proposals that will be launched. In June, we will begin with the first country and then shortly afterwards with the others. So in June, we'll launch the call for proposals for Slovakia. And yeah, it's a competitive process. So we're really looking forward to receiving some good applications from financial intermediaries, as well, obviously, from NGOs and social organizations who will have to work together in delivering Hero on the ground.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to compliment what Juliana said, that in fact the EU pilot is trying to test, replicate and expand on an earlier model that exists in Slovakia that was actually developed by the Erste Foundation and the Social Bank. So actually the innovation started in the philanthropy sector, and we are hoping to engage philanthropic organizations in the other countries as well, Hannah. So if there is nothing left, I have the pleasure to, okay, You're welcome. I have pleasure to give the floor to Johanna Mair, who has kindly accepted the rapporteur's role for today's discussion. Johanna is Professor of Organization, Strategy and Leadership at the Harty School and Stanford University. Johanna, I know it's been a tough role because we've spoken about many topics out in the abstract, into the specific, but we're curious as to what you were able to make out of what was aired today here from your perspective. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Georgia. I hope you can hear me well.
Yes.
Well, what a learning experience. So I learned so much. But before I get started and share a little bit my reflections from listening to you and learning from you, just as a background, so that you understand where I'm coming from. I'm a faculty member at the Public Policy School, the Hertie School here in Berlin. I also direct a research lab at Stanford University around global innovation for impact, and I'm the academic editor of a magazine called Stanford Social Innovation Review. And I'm mentioning that because obviously at SSIR, and we had the pleasure to also support the summit early on by featuring some of the insights from the research group. At SSIR, we have followed the instrument that you call social outcomes contracting for quite a while. No, we have talked about it as social impact bonds. We have talked about it pay for success. It was, of course, started out also in the UK and then in the US very prominently. But, you know, the conversations really centered around like as foundations really pushing this forward. So yes, it has been then attracted the policy level, but we are missing the conversation that we are in the US that we had today, right? Where it was basically at the national level, at the EU level, but also really not losing sight of the local level. So I really appreciated that effort. And it's one of those things where I think that we in Europe, we need to be much more outspoken about also what are the insight and experience we can share with the rest of the world. So it's really also here, again, an open innovation to you to approach us at SSIR. If you say like, hey, we have really insights to share, to learn, we have different formats of how we feature that. And that's the very reason why I'm sitting here in Berlin and still do this at Stanford, because I deeply believe that we cannot have conversation around social innovation compartmentalized by either a Silicon Valley bubble or a European way. We have to start these conversations on a global level, still paying attention to how social problems manifest at the local level. So that is clear. So just also in terms of my own research, I studied the Petros of this world, so organizations that do social innovation, and I particularly interested in organizations that do work for a long time, because they are incredible windows to understand how social innovation works. So one of the things that we also wanted to share back, especially to funders and the organizations themselves, is for them to understand better innovation as a process, but also that innovation is very much a matter of learning. And I was really excited to hear that from you today. If we in the business of addressing social problems do not have a learning lens, we will be frustrated and we will not make progress in the right time, because there is simply no simple initiative that fixed the problem right away with the first time they had an intervention. So it requires experimentation, but it requires a lot of tinkering, adapting the tools along the way. And this is why we think we really need to talk about innovation coupled with scaling. So we cannot, if you are an organization addressing a social problem, you also have need to be good in innovation and need to be good at scaling. So these two processes have to hang together. And scaling came up today as well, right? And the reason why I'm saying this is because if there's one thing is innovation is a matter of learning, then the second thing is don't think about innovation without thinking through the scaling part. Right? Don't innovate if you also have an idea of how you potentially would like to scale that. So I just give you that as an intro to understand where I'm coming to this. Now, I'm also a good friend of Julie. We have worked together. We have built up a center together at the Kennedy School. So this weekend we also talked before she actually did the second recording. So I'm very familiar with what she said, and I think she really set the stage here to get us going at the very high level, also very motivational, motivational way of thinking of us, of our roles as our we feel more comfortable as agitator, innovators, and orchestrators. So I think that gives us a little bit of a portfolio for us to see how we can come in. But also these levers of change in terms of the legal infrastructure that very much at the EU level we can really think through and help arrange. But then also the new accountability systems and new sources of funding. These are all mandates for you. They are good mandates, but they are not the only ones, because as we also heard today in the conversation, especially from the initiatives, is that the crux lies in the implementation. And the crux in the implementation is where also the learning and the feedback needs to go back to the European Commission, setting up the legal infrastructure and the accountabilities. So before Georgia and Giulio kindly invited me to actually share some reflections, I obviously thought, well, I need to somehow be prepared, right? So given that I know the topic area a little bit, and I looked through also the initiative you had, let me share the three reflections that I have prepared, and then I would like to take the opportunity to really get feedback from what I heard today. So the higher level feedback that I wanted to give in general was, yes, the first one, not surprising to you now what I've said, learning. Think about learning and how you factor that in how you design and how you implement. But the second point was, be mindful of resisting important challenges that you will face. You certainly will face. The first challenge is standardizing. You will hear that all the time. How can we standardize a particular initiative because it makes our life easier? And that goes with the second resistance, the challenge of or basically think around how to compare the uncomparables, right? So they go together. Like we want to standardize in order to scale faster and quicker, and we want to standardize so that we have metrics where we can compare one initiative over the other. But we already heard like how difficult it is to standardize and to compare in the business you are in, right, in social outcomes. So be mindful of that. And the third one that I prepared that incredibly well resonates with also some of the things that we heard today, because what I really appreciated is also the more, I don't want to call it philosophical, but really the deeper thinking behind it. And the third point that I wanted to make goes back to the idea of making this fair and just. And it goes the way, don't think about this as just a tool for itself. Think about it, the larger objective of really adapting larger institutional problems we have in our institutional arrangements. Don't let social outcomes projects or contracts to be the solution. Think about how they also help you to see some weaknesses in the overall institutional arrangements and fix that so that we might not need social outcomes contracting in the first place. But let me very briefly, and I really don't want to take too much time here, just share some reflection as I walk through some of the things that I heard. And I truly enjoyed Elena Flores' point, because she mentioned something that is that I personally think it's also very important. The social outcomes contracting as a tool gives us this opportunity to develop a shared understanding. What are desirable outcomes for us, right? What do we want to work toward? And she mentioned it as the idea of jointly defining what can be obtained and how we can obtain it. I really would like you to not lose sight of that. And the danger is if we start developing those tools, we might just adopt them without this very important process, this jointly discussing what are desirable outcomes. And it goes to the idea that if we define tools and we adapt them, they are successful. Some people might just use them and apply them without actually doing this important part of jointly defining what are meaningful outcomes. And it's a very generic thing that we see over and over. We call it in social sciences performativity problem, right? We perform a specific thing, but we then, the goal is to perform this thing. It's with capital asset pricing model. It's the same thing. It was a model and it was not fitting reality, but because analysts performed it over and over, it all of a sudden became reality. So I just want to put that out, and her remarks really reminded me of how important that is. Obviously, she also mentioned the importance of scaling. Dragos is absolutely fulfilling the role of the agitator, and I think in the larger space of politicians, we need that. But also, and I know Julie taped two different versions. In the first version, she outspokenly also had this point of neoliberalism. Social outcomes contracts will always have this connotation. Oh, it's a tool of neoliberalism. No, I personally think we have to go beyond also ideological, opinionated debates, and that's how exactly I see your work and the experiments that you are doing, and grounding it in data, in evidence, that we can move beyond such ideological debates. The first panel, Rudy, absolutely, it's the disruption of the mindsets. I truly enjoyed Mara's point, and also the conversation with Giulio. Data will be very important. Now, data is tricky. Now, a couple of years ago, it's actually 8 years ago, I made an effort that we every year at Stanford and at SSIR, we have a conference on data, because I knew civil society will need a serious conversation about the data, because it's also a question who owns the data. As you all know, the resource of the future is not just money, and Petru, I completely agree with you, and I come back to that. Money is not the problem. Money is there, right? But data is a resource. It's a valuable resource. So who owns it? Who guards it? The guardians. Who will be the guardians of data that allow us to learn properly? And then who wants to learn? Who learns? On whose behalf do we learn? So in that panel discussion, the learning came out, but there are a lot of questions we still have to figure out in terms of data and learning. And also, I just noted down a remark here. What would be, let's say, if we pay for data, and I'm a social scientist, I know how much stupid things you can do with data if you don't understand where the data comes from perfectly, right? So is there a way we can think about the blockchain analogy in terms of making sure that there's a proper use of data? And these are just ideas that I bounce back here from what I've heard. The panel, the second panel, fabulous experiments. I learned so much on that. Fiorenza, I'm Italian, so I just love to hear from you. And I was amazed how you really designed this out so well, and who needs to be involved. Oh my God, this is fabulous in terms of stakeholders and so. And still, there is always the danger of over-design something, right? Because in the business of social problems, there's so many times when in the field, I notice, oh, I really haven't thought about this, right? Or this problem is connected with the other one, right? So the danger here is like, how do we avoid the trap of over-design things? But again, like and also here the discipline of sharing experience with others, taking time, reserved time to say, I need to share this, because then things become clear for you, but also it's helpful for others who just started this. Astrid Brabant one, I really enjoyed that, because we were so open also about the hurdles of implementation. You know, it all looks great on paper, but then even in our home organizations, the silos exist in our departments, and seemingly nitty-gritty things of budgets transfer over. But these are the cracks. These really make also could be the death of a great project. Right? We cannot turn our heads away. Maha, what can I say? I was a banker in a previous life, so I'm really excited about BNP Paribas boldness. And I remember at my times when I actually, working for a German bank, worked with BNP Paribas. It was for me a great experience to listen to you, because it reminded me also of an area of learning that we have to pay attention to. You mentioned the areas where you are applying it: child health protection, homelessness, and I think these are absolutely appropriate ones. Going further on in our learning, collective learning effort, we have to see why is it that these problem domains are, we approach them, and my point is that probably not all problems domain will be very suited to the tool of social outcomes contract. And we have to learn why is it that some of the problems domain are better suited and others not. We have a little bit of experience in that. I'm sure Mara has looked into that as well. But going forward, and then always ask, why do we not apply the tool in some of the domains? Also here, I think your points on a European-wide fund is important, but then also here integrate in setting up the fund with a knowledge perspective in mind, and how can we not put a layer on put an additional layer on learning, but integrate learning and knowledge sharing right from the beginning. Juliana, what can I say? Hero, the problem of the challenge of inclusion of Romas has been lingering with us for so long, and we have achieved things, but not much. So I admire your ambition. I think here the question will really be in the implementation. And my suggestion is really that you have learning partners along the way that help you to potentially also adapt and tweak as the program unfolds, because it's too much of an important project to just wait with let's say a classical evaluation after 10 years. How did it do? No, you need someone that gives you real-time feedback in order to adjust that. And I couldn't be happier than Petru concluding this panel, because that's the voice that I was missing. What about your organization that do stuff on the ground, right? That actually are involved in the social outcomes contracting part. Ultimately, a lot of the learning and knowledge will be there, stored there. They are also the repository of learning, and making sure that we don't lose sight of the importance of capacity building of these organizations. Now it's trendy to not think about organizations doing work on the ground, but I'm old-fashioned. I do believe that we need organizations on the ground. And I want to conclude with something that you mentioned, Petru, with not forgetting other financial instruments, simple loans, grants. And that brings me back to my final point. Let's also not lose sight of how we can make the institutional arrangements really better, because a lot of organizations actually also involved in social outcomes grants, they simply cannot go and ask for a loan from a simple bank because they don't fit the requirements. So there are a lot of things that we need to fix along the way. And we should not use new tools as not looking at those issues. But thank you so much for listening to me. I probably went overboard, but you see my excitement.
Thank you, Johanna. This was very rich, but it will be very useful to also have some of these more critical perspectives that will help us in the further reports, policy notes, and learning materials that we want to have from this session as a collaboration between ECFIN and JRC in the months to come. So this is very useful to actually leave us with some questions at the end. And the time is advancing. I'm sorry, Estelle, you have the last word, the weightiest word. So I give the floor to Estelle Goeger. She's member of cabinet of the Commissioner for Economy, Paolo Gentiloni, for the European Commission. Thank you for honoring us and being with us. Over to you.
Well, thank you, Georgia. And first of all, thank you for the invitation. This has been indeed a very rich session, and I've learned a lot. And I feel a bit humbled to close this session now after a discussion that has involved such great experts and practitioners. So let me maybe start by making some general remarks and taking a little step back. First about the importance of this Social Economy Summit that this session took place in, or in the context of this summit. And I think that we are all aware that since a couple of years now, we've been witnessing a kind of growing awareness of the need to think beyond GDP and to care about well-being. These used to be niche topics, and they have become a bit more institutionalized and moved a bit more to the center of reflections, discussion, public policy. And so well-being considered as an aim in itself and not just, well, a nice by-effect of traditional growth, let's say. And the fact that inequality and also the climate and environmental risks are considered, well, precisely as risks to our economies, but also to our societies and democracy as a whole, is a new opening. And this new opening means that this also opens the door to looking more at actors who have been active in, well, social economy, doing business differently for a long time, doing business with a mission. And before, again, these were considered as marginal, and now they are considered as having a real added value. And looking at a broader scope of topics, different actors, also brings another new dimension, which is the question of governance and co-construction and of projects and policies. And this boils down in the end to empowerment also and participation. And when it comes to today's topic, the investment for impact, this is all about new ways of working, financing. But sometimes I have the impression that beyond today's very motivated and passionate speakers and panels, I have the impression that this is sometimes used as, well, pilots to see what we could do, how we could achieve good, better maybe, and more impact, but basically also with less money, because I know that there might be a point of disagreement with some of the panelists. There has been scarce money, at least for the type of projects or actions that you promote. And the current crisis has temporarily changed things a bit with massive public support measures, massive grant money. But let's not forget that this is temporary. And indeed, I share the little regret that Frank Lee expressed when it comes, for instance, to the Recovery and Resilience Facility, which is that as there are very tight deadlines for committing the amounts of the recovery plans, unfortunately, often the delivery vehicles are more traditional grants and programs and less programs like the ones you are presenting and promoting. But nevertheless, I think that this, as I said, is temporary. So being active and preparing the future is extremely important. And so what you are doing is extremely important. And new approaches and new tools need to be developed. And here, so this is really social outcomes contracting is at the heart of this. And the Commission is engaged in this field. I mean, Georgia is one of the eminent persons promoting this within DG ECFIN and opening doors and pushing us a bit. And this is great that we have so committed people. And over the last couple of years, under the umbrella of the investment plan for Europe, things have been evolving and moving. And the idea really is to strengthen the provision of microfinance as a poverty reduction tool. And here we had the EASI and the FC program as well. And I want to welcome the cooperation that we have with the EIF on these projects. And under the new generation of financial tools that we are now preparing, namely under the InvestEU program, we will seek to engage more with new partners and notably with philanthropy to deploy EU financing really in a partnership approach, trying to go as local as possible, as granular as possible, because I'm very much aware of what was said, that we have to be careful with standardized approaches. So as to really cater for specific situations, it's good to partner up with people who have an expertise. And this is really what we are going to try to do. And working with practitioners, experts, and the kind of community that I see around this session today is really something very positive and that we want to take forward in the future. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Estelle, and thanks to everyone who stayed until the end. This has been a wonderful session and just the first step, as we said. We wish you a wonderful day for now, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.